In a small town called Ashford, there lived a man named Robert and his elderly mother, Helen. They lived together in a modest house on the edge of town, just the two of them, for as long as anyone could remember. Robert was now in his late 30s, a kind and hard-working man who fixed cars at the local garage. But there was one thing that troubled Helen deeply, year after year. Robert had never married. It wasn't that he didn't try. Over the years, Helen had introduced him to daughters of friends, neighbors, women from church. Robert went on dates, sometimes several with the same woman, but something always fell apart. A misunderstanding. Bad timing. A sudden change of heart on the other side. Year after year, it was the same story, until eventually people in town stopped asking, and Helen stopped trying quite so hard, though the worry never left her eyes. "Robert," she would say sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, "I just want to know you won't be alone. That's all I want." "I'm not alone, Mom. I have you," Robert would always answer, smiling. But they both knew what she meant. 5 years went by like this, Robert working at the garage, coming home each evening to share dinner with his mother, the two of them watching old shows together on the small television in the living room. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and it was enough. Then, one winter, Helen got sick. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away. Then tiredness that didn't lift no matter how much she slept. By the time the doctors found what was wrong, it was already too late to do much except make her comfortable. Robert took time off work to care for her, sitting by her bedside every night, holding her hand, talking to her about nothing in particular, just to fill the silence, just to keep her company. Helen passed away on a quiet January morning, with Robert holding her hand. The funeral was small. A handful of neighbors, a few old friends from church, and Robert standing at the graveside in his only good suit, watching as his mother's casket was lowered into the frozen ground at Ashford Cemetery, the same cemetery where his father had been buried decades earlier, back when Robert was just a small boy. After the funeral, Robert went home to an empty house. The silence was the worst part. For 30-some years, there had always been someone else in the house, the sound of his mother's footsteps, the radio she liked to listen to in the kitchen, her voice calling him in for dinner. Now there was nothing. Just Robert, alone, in rooms that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. He went back to work after a week, because that's what people do, but something in him had changed. He stopped smiling at the garage. He stopped going to church on Sundays. He stopped answering when neighbors asked how he was doing, because the honest answer was something he didn't want to say out loud. He started visiting the cemetery in the evenings, after work, before going home to the empty house. He would sit on the cold ground beside his mother's grave, beside his father's grave too, the two stones side by side, and he would talk. Not about anything important. Just talk, the way he used to talk to his mother in her final days. Filling the silence. But as the weeks went on, the talking changed. It became less like conversation and more like something darker. Robert sitting in the cemetery in the fading evening light, talking not to his parents, but about himself. About his life. About everything that had gone wrong. "What did I do?" he asked the gravestones one evening, his voice rough, the first frost of early spring settling on the grass around him. 38 years old. No wife. No kids. Mom's gone. What's the point of any of it? What did I do to deserve a life like this? He sat there as the sun went down, the cemetery falling into shadow around him, the old trees at its edges creaking softly in the cold wind. "I would give anything," Robert whispered, staring at the darkening sky. "Anything at all, to have things be different. To have a family. A wife. Someone. Anything would be better than this." He didn't notice the temperature dropping further than the season explained. He didn't notice the way the shadows between the gravestones seemed to deepen and stretch, longer than the fading light could account for. He was too lost in his own grief to notice that, somewhere in the cemetery, something had been listening, and had heard every word. That night, Robert dreamed. In the dream, he stood in the cemetery, but it was different. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the gravestones stretched on endlessly in every direction, far more than Ashford Cemetery actually held. Standing among them, between two crooked headstones, was a woman. She was young, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a high-collared dress, faded and gray, the style of perhaps 100 years ago. Her face was pale, almost colorless, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. She simply looked at Robert with an expression of deep, patient understanding. "I heard you," she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried strangely, as if it came from very close and very far away at the same time. "Every word. I've been listening for a long time, Robert. Longer than you know." "Who are you?" Robert asked, though in the dream, he wasn't afraid. He felt strangely calm, the way people sometimes feel in dreams when things that should be terrifying simply aren't. "My name was Eliza," the woman said. "I died in this cemetery, in this town, over 100 years ago. I was promised to be married, but my fiancé died before the wedding, an accident the week before. I never married. I never had the family I wanted. I died alone, an old woman, in a house at the edge of this very cemetery, and I was buried here, with no husband, no children, nothing." Robert stared at her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That's terrible." "I've been here a long time," Eliza said. "Watching. Listening. Most people who come here, they grieve, and they leave, and they move on with their lives. But you," she tilted her head slightly, studying him, "you're like me. Alone. Wanting something you can't have. I felt that. I understood it. Can you help me?" Robert asked, and even in the dream, he was surprised at himself for asking. Eliza smiled, just slightly, the first real expression he'd seen on her face. "I can't," she said. "But everything has a price, Robert. Everything you want, a wife, a family, a life that's different from this one, it can be yours. But it won't be free. Nothing ever is." "What's the price?" Robert asked. "Time," Eliza said simply. "Not yours. Someone else's. To give you the life you're asking for, a family, children, all of it, that life has to come from somewhere. It has to be taken from somewhere else. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Robert, in the dream, didn't fully understand, or didn't want to. "I just want to not be alone," he said. "That's all. I just want a family." "Then it's done," Eliza said softly. "You'll have what you asked for, Robert. Just remember, you asked for it. Whatever happens after this, remember that you asked." Robert woke up in his bed the next morning, the dream already fading like dreams do, leaving behind only a vague unease he couldn't quite place. 6 months later, Robert met a woman named Diane at a hardware convention 2 towns over. Completely unrelated to his usual life, a chance meeting that felt, to him, like fate finally smiling on him after so many years. They hit it off immediately. Within a year, they were married. Within 3 years, they had 2 children, a boy and a girl. For the first time in his life, Robert's house wasn't quiet anymore. It was full of laughter, full of noise, full of the family he had wanted for so long. He visited his parents' graves less often now, but when
the thing was screaming and throwing itself against the walls. It appeared at the bedroom window, gripping the iron window bars, its pale white eyes burning in the darkness. Its face was twisted and horrible. Its long black hair hung around it like a curtain. Sheriff Dale had arrived by now with 2 deputies. He took one look at the window and radioed for backup. But Bill Cooper stepped forward and said there was only one way to end this, the same way it had always been ended in Hollow Creek. Tom and the other neighbors had already brought cans of kerosene. Ryan looked at Sarah. She nodded. Ryan looked at the house one last time, the house they had dreamed about, the house they had worked so hard for, and he nodded too. The neighbors poured the kerosene around the base of the house, and Tom touched a torch to it. The flames rose fast and bright against the black Oregon sky. Inside the house, the screaming grew louder and then suddenly stopped. The windows glowed orange and yellow. Pine ash floated up into the night air like snow. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but embers and a black smoldering foundation. In the weeks that followed, the town of Hollow Creek slowly returned to normal. The strange feeling in the air disappeared. Dogs stopped barking at nothing. Children played outside again until sunset. The neighbors came together and helped Ryan and Sarah build a new home on a different piece of land at the other end of town, far from Miller Road. Ryan never talked much about what he had seen that third night, but sometimes late at night, when the wind moved through the pine trees outside their new bedroom window, he would lie awake and listen. And Sarah would reach over in the dark and take his hand, and they both knew that whatever had lived in the darkness of Hollow Creek was gone. But neither of them ever quite stopped listening.